After I finished architecture school, I didn't went straight into doing art, but I spent some years running an art space. It was an independent space or an artist-run center. So in a way, it was like setting up exhibitions for other artists that I got my art education. You know, I was curating for some years, and then I decided to, you know, like just like focus on my own work. But I think that, you know, like architects often have a program, and you have like you approach design as a way to solve needs. And I think that remained like something that still is very present in most of my pieces, because I think of them as something that could be used in a certain context, no? So rarely, I mean, like I do art for art's sake also, but most projects also have like a kind of a aim to address a social need or a specific context, which I think that is something that I inherited from my architecture education. Yes, I mean, my hope is that if you don't think of it as art, it still has some relevance, no? So, and you know, in most occasions, you know, like some of the people that participate are not much concerned with the aesthetic part, or, you know, like it's something that in the, you know, like in a psychological or social or ecological context still has some currency. So I try to operate on processes that are meaningful, even if you don't think of them as art. For me, there are several things that are very important regarding participation. One of them is that, you know, like I provide a structure or a platform, but content is provided by the participants. So first, you know, like they're gonna bring the stories. They're gonna, in the case of Sanatorium, for instance, they bring the story of their lives, and that's what is interesting. You know, like Sanatorium is a space where you, as a participant, it is your story what is the material to work with. This is something that has to do with a word that Augusto Boal created, the Brazilian theater director, that he calls the spect-actor. No? It's a spectator that becomes an actor. So the other element is that it has to be a transformative experience for the participants, in the sense that that also for the participants, the performance or the activity will be a plastic, will allow them to kind of have like access to their own story, and then transform it almost in a sculptural way. So you know, like I never use people just as a kind of to put like people in a picture, you know. I think that I'm very much interested in what are the stories that they will bring about their country, about their own lives, etc. Well, for every project changes, you know. For instance, in the case of the People's United Nations, it works as a kind of space for encounter where there's one delegate, at least one delegate for every country. So there's 196 countries, and lately we have had up to like 180 different people. So, for instance, in that case, what is very interesting is role play. Role play is that you have a role to perform, and you will speak on behalf of your country, but not on behalf of your government. You will speak on behalf of your people. And then it is a kind of honor and a responsibility to be representing a whole country. So even if this starts as a game, what is very interesting is that very rarely, you will be in a single room where there's one person for every country in the world. And what this creates is a kind of environment of high mutual appreciation. Because, in a city like New York or Geneva or Los Angeles, etc., it's always people from everywhere, no? But you're not in role, you don't ask people about their countries in that kind of framework. Here you are forced to kind of well, rather than forced, you're invited to have this conversation, and that's what is engaging. People are very curious about each other. They are very proud about their kind of position. They're also, to a certain degree, entitled because they have been given that position of being the delegate. It's a responsibility they kind of adopted themselves, no? But it's all a big game. But it's not. I believe a lot in games because it's something that provides access to a conversation that otherwise wouldn't happen. If you want to take this very seriously, it won't happen. You need to create this kind of environment of play for the interactions to occur. What I do a lot is that I kind of borrow techniques from other fields. So for instance, I constantly go to trainings on kind of therapeutic techniques or theater techniques or psychology techniques, etc., conflict resolution, etc. So, if I learn how to conduct psychodrama or how to do hypnosis or how to, do these different things, then I bring them into the context of art, and then I mix them. So the artistic part is to create new combinations. But the issue is that social practice or efforts that were done before, like Joseph Beuys and other artists that were interested in the kind of potential of art to produce social change. The key word here is change. You won't find so many techniques in the history of art, but there have been other fields of human activity that are very interesting with change and how change is produced. So what I've done is, to learn about these other fields, how to modify the culture of a group, for instance, or how to, put two very different opinions and try to find a common ground or things like that. So I think that what is very important with this kind of field of art, of social practice, is to have as much sources that are non-artistic, as you can. started in New York when we worked with it. Basically, we provided kind of the therapies or sessions for 2,000 people. Then, during the 100 days of Documenta, you know, many people see it, but people who signed for the activity were more than 15,000. And then it went to London for Whitechapel, which, you know, there was another 5,000 at the kind of a power plant in Toronto. Then it went to Miami. Now it's in San Luis, Missouri. Next is going to Sao Paulo.
For the Biennale, no?
No, it's Oca. It's in the park of Ibapuera, which is a place that is visited by 1 million people every weekend. It's humongous. And then it's going to Rio. And so, you know, it's been 3 years in operation because it's designed to be something that can use very little resources that are local, but, you know, like thanks to the voluntary you know, like the voluntaries that facilitate the activities, you can do it all the time. You know, I think that, you know, like this project, if you had to pay the volunteers, it would be too costly. So one of the most important things for me is that, you know, like if you're gonna do voluntary work, it has to be a work that is highly rewarding. One of the things that is most satisfying for me is to, you know, like to get feedback from the people that have volunteered, because they tell me this is, you know, like one of the best experiences that they have had ever. There are the archives for everything. You know, there's a book of questions, there's a book of epitaphs, there's a book of confessions. You know, all that what is produced in the sanatorium is, you know, like becoming part of a massive archive. Yet, I'm not interested in showing the archive because it's a project that is alive. And what is important is I mean, like, in a way, it is a project where there's no spectators. There are spectators, no? Like, you know, like, but when you enter when you participate in the project, you don't have a passive role. I mean, probably if you only see it from outside, you won't understand. But if you do it, if you do the activities, basically, you will be telling your own story. And you will be working with your own story. You're bringing the narrative. And you are the only spectator in the room, but but you have an active role. So, you know, it's the real kind of aesthetic experience is very intimate and it's always new. So it's not that I'm very, you know, that's what really matters, you know, and that's why it is renewed every time that it's staged. The idea is not, I mean, it's not to avoid talking about the problems. On the contrary, you know, like the idea is but the idea is not to only do a kind of big explanation of why things don't work, but rather how could they work. So, because, you know, when you identify the problem, your mind is kind of, you think of yourself outside the problem. You know, you're putting blame into an exterior entity. When you have to think of the solution, you are inside the problem. You become the problem somehow. And I think that, you know, like if you become the problem, then you are responsible. If you're putting blame in an exterior entity, you say, oh, you know, like the world is badly run by governments, badly run by corporations, badly run because of the apathy of people. It's like you are letting yourself off the hook. You are kind of not accepting your responsibility and thinking that, you know, like complaining or criticizing actually leads towards a solution. But very rarely it does. You know, I think that what I'm interested is in kind of sharing tools where we can learn to think collectively, because I think that what is most important is to imagine alternatives, to imagine how could things work right. So, you know, if you have a vision of how would you like the world to be, or how would you like to solve a particular situation, then you can think what are the necessary steps to move in that direction. So it's very important, you know, it's a kind of combination of imagination and desire. You know, you have to imagine how do you want things to be different. And then you have to desire to move in that direction, and then you have to think how are we going to get there? Therapy doesn't have to be necessarily about like treating a disease. It's rather, you know, about, it's about having room to reimagine yourself. And it can be, you know, like very, like kind of immediate decisions that you need to make, you know. For instance, there's a therapy that is called the philosophical casino that works like an oracle. So you ask a question, and then you throw a giant dice that has like different quotations from philosophers, and then based on what you get as an answer, you interpret your question. This is your like a kind of oracle. So what it helps you is to, you know, like to have like a kind of different lens or angle to look at your problem and to discuss with other people your problem. To maybe, you know, like think of what should be the way to tackle that particular problem. And, you know, like it may be a problem today and not a problem tomorrow. I mean, you know, it can be, for instance, right now I am in a kind of crisis because I don't know whether I have to make a film or not. You know, I want to do a film, but it's very expensive. And it's something that I know that I'm going to lose money, a lot of money, and I won't be able to sell or anything because it's not like a kind of commercial venture. So, you know, I have to think, well, you know, like is it worth doing it or not? So, you know, I would use the kind of philosophical casino now to solve my dilemma. And, you know, it's just like a kind of I mean, like the idea is to somehow, like, when you have like when you're stuck, you have like no mobility because you are kind of oppressed. But then, you know, what game or play produces is that you expand a little your room, your field of activity, and then you can like kind of move a little and then find a way out. So what these techniques do is to, you know, like just massage a little bit your current situation, and it's something that you can very easily have access to. So there are objects and there are techniques that you can use, you know, like to move on and to get past that kind of critical moment. There are a lot of elements that I'm interested in bringing from Mexico and Latin America into the world. For instance, because, you know, often there is a kind of tradition of certain like social techniques that, for instance, like what Ivan Illich was doing here about you know, the schooling society, or finding kind of the tools that the community could have access, or Augusto Boal in Brazil, or Antanas Mocus in Colombia, or Enrique Pichon Riviera in Argentina, etc. I think that there's like a kind of a untold Latin American armory or kind of arsenal of tools that would be very helpful to make accessible for the rest of the world, because I believe that there's, for instance, perhaps what I'm interested is also in creating spaces that are non-technological, you know, that where you have like these kind of interactions that are not mediated. But at the same time that I'm interested in this kind of tradition and kind of cultural resources, I'm not so interested in the ethnographical specificity. So for instance, I don't believe that a shaman or a kind of a witch that, you know, like has any special qualities. I am interested in kind of learning the trick, learning the kind of procedure, and then making it generic, like a kind of accessible. So for instance, if there is a kind of I mean, precisely because I'm trying to go beyond specialization. You know, I'm not interested in you know, that I don't believe that that if there's something useful, it should be useful in any context and conducted by any people. More than art is more, you know, here we're talking about creativity, you know, like how do you, and imagination. I mean, the kind of biggest threat is the failure of like the lack of imagination to think about different solutions, you know. So, I mean, it's not that art, I cannot speak about other artists, and, you know, I cannot like, and I don't think that art should have this function. But if you want art to have this function, you should not deny that possibility. I don't know if I explained myself, but, you know, it's not that I think that art should have this goal. But if you want to use it in this way, I mean, like, you should like allow this effort or this undertaking to take place, you know. Because, you know, like what I'm doing, as I told you before, you know, like I'm not, I mean, like I don't own these techniques, you know, like what I'm doing is like putting them in a new context, making these new combinations. But all these things are tools that have been proven to work before I was born, you know, like things that have been are 100 years old or sometimes more, and they're kind of small rituals that form part of the resources of mankind. So it's something that, you know, like has been used for a lot of time, and then, you know, like you kind of, I mean, bring them alive and activate them in a new context, but it's not something that I own or that I have, you know, like created from scratch. Art is some kind of secular religion in a way, in the way that, you know, like for instance, there's no new cathedrals built, but there's always new museums being built. And, you know, the objects that are placed in these museums are objects of worship, and then you do like large pilgrimage to see these places, and, you know, like performances, etc., are kind of taken extremely seriously, with the same seriousness that religion was taken in the past. So, you know, in a way, from a sociological aspect, you could think of art as a kind of a new religion, in a way.